Mutant Liberation Begins, or as I keep dubbing it in my head, The Trial of Magneto, because that is largely what episode 2 of X-Men 97 is adapting or pulling from. But it's also cobbling together a lot of different story beats and rearranging them. It's interesting to examine the differences and the parallels. Some really work, some are mid, some don't. It's all very fascinating. Just to take a look at the changes that occur between mediums. We've been doing stream of consciousness overviews, but we've done a more in-depth look at episode 1. So if you missed that, of course, I'll link it below. And some people point out some stuff from that episode, so stay tuned to the end and we're gonna add it in here. As for episode 2, we're gonna go through it. Look at it as an episode on its own, inside of X-Men 97, also X-Men 92. So from those contexts, and then also from an adaptational standpoint. So we got a lot to do. And of course, spoilers. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and let's get to it. Mutant Liberation Begins sees the return of the much beloved previously on X-Men, a staple of the original 92 series. The theme is changed from the first episode in terms of imagery utilized. It now includes Magneto, and there are a couple of references to moments from the 92 series added in as well, like Storm defeating Callisto in episode 5, Captive Hearts, also a flash of Asteroid M, Bishop falling through time. They're fun. The title, Mutant Liberation Begins, is not only a reference to Magneto saying variations of the same thing in comics, it was also something he directly said in the 3rd episode of the 92 X-Men series in the episode entitled Enter Magneto, which we also looked at recently on this channel.
Mutant Liberation begins.
Overall, this episode follows up on many threads from Enter Magneto. They're good to pair together because they really show Magneto's growth and the changes he's undergone. You can even see how Magneto recontextualizes some of his own actions. Whether that's deliberate or just a different interpretation of what he was going for in Enter Magneto remains to be seen, but either way, it's interesting.
I have only ever acted to avenge crimes against my people.
In Enter Magneto, Magnus chides Beast for even assuming he could have a fair trial, mocking Beast's willingness to do so, even as a gesture of good faith. Well, in this episode, he's the one who agrees to do that same gesture. Also, he's called Eric now, because what Magneto has been called has moved over time. At the time of the original series, Magnus was the name being used. Over time, Eric has become the predominant name, so now he's gonna be called Eric. I know Magnus, the Master of Magnetism, was a bit much. Triple M's, I kinda liked it though. There's nothing wrong with Eric. Disney Prince Eric II. The episode opens properly on Magneto shocking the world by saving some humans when a Ferris wheel is coming off its bearings.
Art? Is that who I think it is? Saving humans?
No, that poor Walkman. Did we mention it's 1997? Walkmans are making a mini comeback, by the way, time of recording. They're considered retro. That makes me feel ancient, but also excited when some of the artists I follow release their albums on cassette. I like Walkmans, or Discman. I had a Discman. In the episode, the news report is questioning the motivation behind Magneto's actions. Can he be trusted? And we're shown a variety of groups listening and interpreting what's going on. One character we see is our de facto leader of the FOH, in that he's the one that spoke the most in the first episode, and he's shown to be constructing a weapon. It's got one bullet. They really highlight that point. This character is going to take on the role of the Executioner, spelled just with an X, because it's the X-Men. Although it appears to be a different characterization than what was going on in the mainline Marvel comics. But the X-Men 97 tie-in comics are starting to show some of the backstory. There are tie-in comics. If you didn't know, don't worry. They started releasing after the show started airing. We talked about the first issue. We went over it a bit on live stream. I'll link it below. So let's see what we're working with. The Executioner in the 97 series is a mutant-hating radical, yes, but it's all mutants. He's identified so far as Carl Denty over in the tie-in comic verse, and like his 616 counterpart, was an FBI agent. The Executioner in the comics, Carl Denty, who debuted in Uncanny X-Men Annual 17 in 1993, had a bit of a different trajectory, in that his target, for he would usually have one when he showed up, was at least at the start evil mutants, or those he perceived as evil. So specifically mutants that were a danger to others, or had harmed others in some way. When you first meet him, he's hunting down Mastermind. Denty was radicalized after the death of his friend and mentor, a fellow FBI agent. He died at the hands of mutants, and so then Denty went and got his hands on some alien tech, which he had access to because his mentor had been working with the X-Men and Charles Xavier, and he used it to fashion himself into basically a mutant Punisher, or rather a Punisher for mutants. It's even said in canon that the Punisher was his motivation, his inspiration. He already had a lot of concerns, let's phrase it that way, about mutants and the idea that they were the next step in human evolution instead of viewing them more as an aberration, a mistake. The interesting thing about the Executioner in comics is you get to see the evolution from targeting Mastermind, moving on to Emma Frost because of her role in the destruction of the Hellions, or rather him blaming her for that. But then you have moments when he's targeting Rogue because of what happened with Cody Robbins, the boy she touched before she had a handle on her powers. In X-97, this episode, they've assigned him as an extreme member of the FOH, and they set his target as as Magneto.
See? It's the whining. I hate your whining just as much as I hate you.
Now we're gonna go at this at the idea that most people will just be watching the show and potentially not have access to the tie-in comics, and time of recording they haven't revealed his full backstory there anyway. So that's what we're working with. Later at the end of the season and when everything's released, perhaps there'll be more context. And it does make sense why a 97 series goes in this direction. It's simplified at the moment, but it works, and he has the potential to show up again and hunt other targets. Back at the mansion, the X-Men are torn about Magneto, who has been using his free time to save the Morlocks, who the X-Men forget about half the time. Magneto wants to be more efficient with their resources than Charles was and throws some light shade.
It saddens me that none of you, nor Xavier himself, thought to use his considerable finances to do the same.
There are varying attitudes towards Magneto, ranging from outright hostile distrust from Cyclops, who wants to just sick his wife on him to read his mind constantly, or more accepting, let's give him a chance from Rogue. Storm somewhere in the middle. Magneto and Rogue, we'll get there. All in all, this is a good scene highlighting the different dynamics and relationships on the team. And one of the things that people enjoy about the X-Men, all the interpersonal drama. It's interesting, one doesn't want it to be the sole focus, but it's an additional layer, a spice that adds to everything else that's going on. The following scene is also very strong, where Jean confesses her fears to Storm about her child being a mutant. It's a poignant sequence highlighting a lot of understanding for motherhood or parenthood and the fears and concerns one can have even before a child is born.
Boy, do I sound like a fool.
No, Jean. You sound like a mother.
But that's not all the bonding that's happening in the X-Mansion, and here's where some people were surprised and either pleased or put off or confused. Rogue goes to talk with Magneto, and there are a couple of interesting things to note in this scene.
My past is too littered with error.
Mine was too, remember?
It's pulling from a lot of things not firmly established in the prior cartoon though. This is one of those sequences where it stands a tiny bit stronger on characterization if you have a prior comic knowledge, because it's playing with the idea of their shared villainous past. For Rogue started off as a villain. She had to earn the X-Men's trust. That wasn't a huge part of the original series though, because that series started post all of that having happened, and then they didn't refer to it too much. But that is one of the threads that's being played with in her conversation with Magneto, a commonality.
The thing is, I didn't go about demanding their trust. I earned it.
Another thing we see here is discussion around Magneto's helmet, and it being specifically used to block out Charles.
When we parted ways, I told myself I needed this to protect myself from his psychic powers.
Okay, the helmet. Let's begin. There's much to discuss. Helmet discourse. For the longest time, Magneto's helmet didn't do anything except be fashionable or silly. You pick. It definitely aligned with the rest of his costume. Now the debate for some becomes, when did that change? When did it start blocking telepathy? Some people debate whether it was the Bryan Singer X-Men films that turned it into such a device where it repelled said telepathy with an emphasis on from Charles, or if it was something that started in the 80s. Because that's what you'll usually see when people combat this. It'll be a vague, it started in the 80s with Claremont. But oftentimes there's not a specific issue attached. So you know what that means. I was on the case. Let's go, Watson. You know this is where I just went down a rabbit hole. Here's what I found. Get cozy. Caressed on Magneto's helmet. Now the helmet has been around since X-Men #1 in 1963, because Magneto debuted in that first issue. But at that point, it didn't block telepathy. In fact, a few issues later, him and Charles beef it out on the astral plane, and he's there in the helmet. This is an issue 4. In the early days, the powers were kind of loose. Lots of things were loose as the canon kind of coalesced and solidified. But at the start, it didn't do anything. The first mention I was able to find of Magneto being able to block telepathy is from Uncanny X-Men 161 from 1982, which is written by Chris Claremont. So we've now entered that vague 80s period that people use. We're here in the 80s, let's go. In this issue, we see the history of Charles and Magneto meeting, and when Charles meets Magnus, he notes that he can't read his mind. He's no telepath, but his natural psychic defenses are as formidable as my own. Could he be another like me? A mutant? And for years, that was it. But then enter 1987, where we start to hear specifically about advanced circuitry inside the helmet and it being modified. In X-Men vs. Avengers #4 from 1987, Magneto upgrades his helmet, so it gives him telepathic abilities. Look at how Magneto's holding his cape in the side tag. I love it. He is fashion. You seem awfully preoccupied, Magneto. What exactly are you doing with that helmet? I am constructing a weapon, Leiko. Perhaps the ultimate weapon. Pity the world, little one. From this moment on, it will never be the same again. You are quite perceptive, Captain. I did recover certain circuitry. Circuitry which, when combined with my own magnetic powers, allows me to completely dominate any and every living mind I choose. I never used the circuitry before because Professor Charles Xavier, the former leader of the X-Men, was a telepath powerful enough to block its effects. So yeah, here we're presented with the idea that his helmet always had circuitry in it to control minds, but he couldn't use it because of Charles. Magneto's plan in this arc is to use the helmet to just stop all humans from feeling any prejudice towards mutants. Just control their minds. Magneto ends up destroying the helmet this issue because when he tries to change Captain America's mind, he's stunned to find he never had any anti-mutant sentiments. It destroys his all humans hate mutants worldview that everybody's just inherently biased and that's just how it is. When he gets a glimpse of the fact that that's not true, it really makes him stop and question what he was doing. Who is the monster? Because you see, he was the one who had an implicit bias, thinking that everybody else had an implicit bias, even though some people do have an implicit, but you look at the layers. Dr. Doom would rebuild this helmet, but Magneto ended up destroying it again. That was in X-Factor Annual number 4. From the year 1989. My helmet, or perhaps a reasonable facsimile. I equipped it with a very special microcircuitry, which when activated by my magnetic might would allow me to dominate an untold number of human minds. So once again, this is just solidifying the idea that this was just a thing it could do. Pesky Charles stopping him from mind controlling people all the time. What a powerful telepath Charles is. To have to constantly be stopping Magneto from doing this just out of the corner of his mind, like, oh, he's trying to control minds again. So could you infer that the helmet blocked telepathy? Maybe, but then again, why would it have to? Because it had been established in this time period that Magneto had natural psychic defenses. Doom and Magneto hanging out and having a philosophical debate about trauma shaping you was a good time, by the way. Check this issue out. Now, the first concrete, the helmet stops Charles specifically. We can look at the X-Men film from the year 2000, the film by Bryan Singer. The reason? Singer wasn't very familiar with X-Men comics and even had them banned from set as he wanted people to take the characters seriously. And so he was left with a question after watching the series, which was, why didn't Charles just put Magneto to sleep or, you know, shut his brain off or something? For further confirmation on why this happened, the screenwriter David Hayter stated, this happened because the director said one day, why couldn't Xavier just make Magneto go to sleep or something? No one had an answer, so we decided it was the helmet. The thing is, this is actually a really good idea, and it would bleed back. The Ultimate Universe would adopt this concept under Mark Millar, and in the main universe, 616, in New X-Men 136 in 2003, we see the Omega Gang using thought-blocking helmets based on designs of Magnetos they found on the internet. And it would just become a thing going forward. That would just be how the helmet worked.
Please, be the better man. You haven't.
But I don't trust you.
Eric, there will be no turning back!
But I'm open to being wrong. If you have the issue number from the 80s where it's referenced that it blocks or that it's specifically to keep Charles out, let me know. Or is this just something that's been inferred and osmosed over time? Because it would make sense. It would make sense for this to have always been a thing. Or are people conflating it with the Juggernaut's helmet, which does specifically keep Charles out? For good reason. Because of the things that happened there. Charles is scary. Let me know. I'm open. And again, I just like talking about Magneto's helmet. It's fun. It's for fun. As for the idea of it keeping Charles out, love it.
But you were worried if you still felt how much he loved you, you wouldn't be able to go through with your crusade.
Moving from loving Charles to loving Rogue.
Do you think your team would still trust you if they knew?
That was a long time ago, Eric.
This scene also plants the seeds of a past between Rogue and Magneto, and some people absolutely hate it. It's disrupting Rogue and Gambit, or they think it's gross and other reasons to justify not liking a ship that they don't like. But wait, I can explain. There's context. Some people think this only hails from the out-of-continuity stories, but there's more. Wait, there's more. However, in the context of the 92 animated series, it's really grasping at straws. It may appear to come out of left field. Titan Comics may change this, we'll see. But as for the mainline verse, there were hints of Magneto-Rogue flirtation and a flat-out relationship. Actually, relationships at points. First, we need to look at the infamous Uncanny X-Men 274. Is it infamous? No, but probably for people who don't like this relationship and the flirtation, yes. This is from 1991. We're still with Claremont, but now we're in the Jim Lee art era. We're also in the younger Magneto era, but we'd been there for a time. Because, okay, so Magneto was de-aged to a baby and then had to grow up and come back to being an adult. And so in Trial of Magneto, which we're going to be looking at, Uncanny X-Men 200, they specifically mention he's in his 30s. Just a silver fox, I guess. I just think that's interesting. It always amuses me when you can just start a sentence with, so he was de-aged to a baby. Now in issue 274, Rogue and Magneto had allied together while they were trapped in the Savage Land. And nothing actually happens, but there's tension. Nearly kissing tension, and that ignites people's imaginations. Will they? Won't they? We saw the tension. But what many think of first for this pairing, that happened in Age of Apocalypse from 1995. They're a full-on married couple. He could touch her because magnetism. They had a baby. In that universe, that was just how it was. But back in the mainline, we had Joseph. Rogue and Joseph. Joseph was a clone of Magneto who was created to kill him, but the clone thought he was Magneto. Actually, he didn't know who he was. He just knew he was de-aged and had magnetic powers, and other people then would assume that it was a de-aged Magneto, because why wouldn't you? He'd already been turned into a baby. This is just a thing that happens to him. And during that time, Rogue and him got close. And some of the other X-Men were surprised. They actually exclaim about it in X-Men 55 during the Onslaught arc. They dedicate a whole issue to Rogue meeting Joseph, or Magneto as she thought, in X-Men Unlimited 11, which even has the cover Magneto and Rogue starting over, where she ends up being saved by him, and after yelling things that very much make it sound like they were together, they end up on a road trip. She falls for Joseph, who she believes is Magneto, hard. So hard. She doesn't want him to remember who he was, because can't he stay like this? And that went on for a while. It didn't work out though. I'm cliff noting this because the blocks of Rogue and Magneto actually go on for a decent amount of time. Eventually we would end up back with actual Magneto and Rogue, but then on top of this, there were all the other out of continuity things happening, like Age of X, Exiles that has their son in it. The point is, it's not coming out of nowhere, and it's not just pulling on a tiny thread. This is a relationship that people have played with more than once. And there are some interesting ideas to pull from there. I mean, it's comics, but the ages were re-aging, de-aging, up, all kinds of things. Of course, it can give some people an actual uncomfortable feeling based on their real life experiences, but also there are times when people are looking for reasons to just justify not liking a certain ship because they already just don't like it. It varies. And then there are some people who like it. One doesn't have to like or dislike it, it just happens to have precedence. And lots of stories to pull from, so we'll see. Man, Marvel. Clones everywhere. Now back to the episode. Valerie Cooper arrives to arrest Magneto, who in a mirror of Uncanny X-Men 199 does stand down and go with them. Valerie was also in that issue, but the big difference there is that he was also being arrested by mutants, not just humans. Magneto also doesn't just go quietly, he does showcase how powerful he is before. This Magneto wouldn't be tricked by a wooden gun. And so here we are, the trial. The Trial of Magneto was a double-sized issue, Uncanny X-Men 200, and they pull imagery directly from the cover for this episode. His crimes in the episode are of course referring to his activities in the 92 series. And this episode utilizes the trial to great effect. It allows for some speeches from humans, from Magneto, counterpoints of varying degrees. It is interesting, and while heavy-handed, it's well thought out and written. It presents some food for thought, which is what it wants to do. And it causes some discussions about whether or not it has as much weight because it's Magneto saying it, whether that gives it more or less. I've seen some interesting discussions, and then some that go too far. This is the way. An interesting point for me is Magneto's statement that he was only ever responding, which I'm not sure. I'm looking at you, Enter Magneto.
Attacked power plants, factories, government buildings, determined to disrupt human society, paving the way for mutant takeover.
But that's good, because some people will disagree and say, no, it's because of the overall environment. So there's some nuance to be had there, some discussions to be had. It's a very strong scene, and different from its comic counterpart. Not better or worse, just different. Though it does take some parts word for word. The comic has so many other things going on, and while it has its moments, there are a lot more threads that are relevant to the plots there. This trial works excellently for this series. And while it is in a way answering Enter Magneto, unlike the first episode of the 97 series, which was more nostalgic and was more of a retread of Night of the Sentinels, this episode pulls the series firmly into its own direction, while maintaining the tone and feel of the original. Like in Uncanny X-Men 200, there are protests, but in the comic, it was in a larger scale. They were happening in different places across the globe, and violence was breaking out. The X-Men had to be deployed to put a stop to it. And in fact, that's a way to get the X-Men away, to use that as a distraction. Another difference that is more focused on in the comic is that there are mutants who are angry with Magneto and who want to take him down. Because Magneto's attitude, and it's shown in the 92 series as well, it leads him to believe that anybody who doesn't align with him is a traitor, basically, to the cause. And so that means that if they get in his way, they get hurt too. So there are lots of people who would have problems with Magneto. Magneto's actions have made a lot of people suffer. So again, it's an interesting discussion. Although the mutants who come and try and take him out in the comic, they have their own personal reasons that don't have to do with that. Magneto's speech is a definite highlight of this episode. Well, speech is. There is intercutting to a heavily pregnant Jean who goes into labor, which is a mirror to Uncanny X-Men 200 where Madeline Pryor goes into labor. This episode opts for more labor shenanigans and humor. It works, and there's some solid moments for Wolverine.
He's here!
Apocalypse?
The baby!
This trope just grates on me personally, but that's entirely a me thing. The way that Wolverine catches the keys without even thinking about it is excellent though. It's really funny. The protesters eventually overwhelm the barricade and burst in, which is the opportunity for the Executioner to gain entry, and for Morph to once more provide some cameos, transforming into Lady Deathstrike, then Colossus, and Psylocke. The fight is very solid.
Round two, Absorb this!
But alas, Cyclops must bail, for his wife is in labor. And that's something that would happen also in the 92 series. Sometimes people just have to leave in the middle of a fight. I don't know why, it always made me chuckle. It's like, sorry, other things, life things. So Rogue flies Cyclops out, which is important because she'll be needed in the scene she's going to.
Prep an IV and get this lady to a room.
This leaves Storm to take charge of what's going on there. She demands they free Magneto so he can help defend everyone, since those leading the trial are now also being sought for even giving him quarter or listening to him.
Oh, to play by the rules, and still they come for you.
Now in issue 200, it's not the angry protesters who break in and try and kill Magneto, but mutants, the Fenris twins. They are Baron von Strucker's children, the Nazi. They're mutants because they were bioengineered to be so by Dr. Armin Zola, who felt it would make them superior. The idea that mutants are indeed superior to regular humans. There's so many layers there, that's really interesting. Now, the twins hate Magneto because they thought he was responsible for the death of their dad, so they use the trial as an opportunity to attack him. And so Magneto defends the court. This allows him to be viewed in another light. The sequence in 97 does much the same thing, but comes at it from another angle, but it's with the same messaging. In issue 200, you may have also seen Charles in some of those panels. This is the issue where he ends up going off into space because he was dying of a heart condition, and it's this issue where he asks Magneto to look after his school for him, and Magneto agrees. They also have this panel where it looks like they're about to kiss, but they don't. There are several cool sequences in this scene of Storm and Magneto defending the UN. It also is a good demonstration of how Magneto thinks. His first instinct is to create giant hanging swords of Damocles, that's what they look like basically, and then fashion them into a cage. He's not okay. Also, Storm just automatically electrifies it. They are in sync.
Let us see how their mob manners fare against the shock of good conduct.
Until Storm gets shot. It's all fun and games until someone gets shot. She's shot with the special gun made by the Executioner in this. This is mirroring issue 185 of the Uncanny X-Men from the year 1984. In 185, Storm is shot by Gyrich, utilizing a special gun made with tech by Forge, which removes powers. She pushes Rogue out of the way of the shot, as Rogue was the intended target. Life Death, which follows, is a very powerful arc for Storm, and this episode really hammers home the loss. It's painful. They really portray the devastation.
Behold the reward. What must we do to be good enough?
Magneto nearly loses it at this. It's understandable, but he holds back out of respect for Charles's dream and desire for coexistence, and just to try and walk that path despite everything that's happened. They intercut his final speech to the UN with Nathan being born, and there were some issues getting Jean seen by a doctor. These scenes were meant to convey allegorical references to bigotry. There are a couple of more blatant instances of that in this episode. They work on the whole because the way they slot in for the most part fits, although for some they may be a bit more jarring or pull them out. It depends, some may not even notice them. But again, as an overall packaging for the episode, it makes sense because they're really trying to hammer home some of the themes. I love the X-themed mugs. Storm learns that the loss of her powers appear permanent, and unable to cope leaves the team, but not before writing a moving letter that we can overlay things on top of. Like this Eric and Charles photo. I just wanted to mention it. It's super cute. The scene where Storm jumps at the lightning and thunder as she can no longer sense, well, the storm or control it, it's just a masterful use of storytelling. It's very powerful. The entire ending of this episode is solid. Morph turning into Sabretooth to help Wolverine unwind, the rising tension over the Magneto Gambit Rogue thing, and the episode ends with a shocker, a woman who looks like Jean collapsing into the arms of Morph at the door of the X-Mansion. La gasp, roll credits. This episode is a lot in a good way. A lot, but not too much. Compared to episode 3, which is coming, it feels positively slow-paced. Now, on its own as an episode, it's a strong one. It sets up several plot lines and showcases excellent growth for Magneto. It shows the status of the world and the X-Men. It has some cool fight sequences, strong emotional moments, and humor that lands. It has some lines that may stick with you. And while there are little moments here and there that may jar, the overall picture is a very strong one. It's, in my opinion, stronger than the first episode, though others may like it less if they find that it's preachifying at them too much. For me, the reason why I feel it's stronger is that it does more of its own thing, in terms of being less of a retread of the previous episode that it's responding to from the 92 series. And it also does a solid translation of the trial of Magneto into this universe. It takes the core concept and some imagery and really makes it work for what it's trying to do. It's a solid adaptation, even though a lot of the details are very different. In terms of the 90 series overall, while it does feel like things are moving forward, there are also some things that I could see rankling. This is where some of those details that may be jarring come up. The whole when did Magneto and Rogue, when, what? Or things like mentioning the helmet or things that have become more common in the lore since that series. Like, as he modified that off screen. It's not entirely seamless, so it's just gonna depend on the individual whether these things take away too much for them to enjoy or whether they make them enjoy it less. On the whole though, the series is going strong so far. Time of recording. In general, it's a fun, good time. Now, as for the first episode and some details to add, the newspaper, there was some debate. Some felt it featured Stacy X rather than Marrow on the cover, and also mentioned there was a Marrow missing poster that can be seen in one of the sequences. Others felt that it was Loa, not Squid Boy, next to Nature Girl. So I pulled that up for you so you can see mutants, so many mutants. We also have a panel example of Cyclops using his eye beams to stop a fall, because I asked for one, so it wasn't out of nowhere. Thank you, by the way. Ultimate Spider-Man number 92. So thank you very much for that. It is appreciated. Behold and bask in the glory. The fun thing about this version of the X-Men is that the changes made have ended up creating a unique feeling universe, and there's still plenty of exciting things to check out in the comics. It highlights how both are fun in their own ways, and it also highlights the different ways that stories can go. It also leads how sometimes just distance and time make you look at things a bit differently. This series maintains the tone and spirit of the stories it pulls from. In some cases, like in episode 3, we'll see some modifications that really work. But those are just my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. What did you think of this episode? Is there something that I didn't highlight that you want to really discuss? Put it down there, you know I want to hear it. I'm having a really good time talking about all this. Do you just need to talk about Rogue and Magneto in a separate video? We need to break it down. How dare they? Or yay, whatever you're feeling. Or meh. Please share your thoughts. And while you're down there, please do all the YouTube things like share, comment, subscribe, hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time spent discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye. I started waving too soon. Bye.